Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here. My name is Elias Boger, and I will be discussing the socioeconomic consequences of gray wolf reintroduction in the Sierra Nevadas, specifically in the Sierra Valley. Before we begin, I want to extend a warning to my audience. I'll be showing some pretty graphic images of animal carcasses. If those trigger you in any way, feel free to step out, but they are necessary in showing the truth and the reality of this issue. For the past 2 years, I've cowboyed on large-scale cattle operations in the Sierra Valley. I often say the most meaningful days of my life came from that work, but so did the hardest, and that is because of the reintroduction of gray wolves. In 2011, a gray wolf classified as OR7 by the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife crossed into California, the first confirmed wolf in California since 1924. Since then, conservation efforts by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife have successfully bolstered wolf populations across the state. But that success has ultimately come with a cost, one that has fallen heavily on ranchers and rural communities alike. And that brings me to my essential question. How can state agencies, such as the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, balance the protection of wolf populations with the needs of local livestock operations? My lived experiences have led me to my central argument being wolf reintroduction, combined with current protection policies, have failed to account for the real economic and emotional toll on cattle producers. In my personal opinion, wolves do not have a place in the state of California. And while I will present slides portraying data analysis, such as population growth, depredation rates, and field research, I want to emphasize something more important: a story, the story. A story of financial and emotional loss inflicted upon ranchers present to the Sierra Valley. Because charts and statistics simply cannot capture the violence, the loss, or the reality of what's happening on the ground. What I've had to do, what I've had to see, and what I've had to experience out there. Which is why I conducted an expedition with hopes to produce interviews from local producers in the Sierra Valley, my bosses, my friends, to give voice to those living this every day. But first, the data. Since 2022, California has seen rapid expansion in wolf packs and activity zones. Research conducted by UC Davis experts Ken Tate and Tina Saitone shows a dramatic rise in wolf populations, an increase of over 900% from 2015 to 2024. Whilst conservation has certainly succeeded, that same success has ultimately meant escalating loss. In the summer of 2024 alone, at least 137 cattle were confirmed or likely killed by wolves, equating to, considering 2023 beef prices, upwards of $400,000, or approximately $3,000 per kill. However, this number lacks to address the value per head when considering gender, age, breeding capability, etc., a financial burden of which has fallen directly and solely on the producer. Speaking anecdotally, the real number is almost certainly higher. Many kills go undocumented due to the difficulty of verification. Carcasses are often scavenged before they can be properly assessed, leaving producers with losses that never make it into official data, and therefore never receive state compensation for. From firsthand experience, I can tell you that the 2025 season was worse. However, without released data, those losses remain invisible to the broader public. The solutions proposed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, including flagery, drone hazing, increased monitoring, and range riding strategies, have largely failed. They are either too expensive, simply ineffective, or oftentimes both. Flagery involves stringing vibrant flags among fence lines, provoking both a visual and auditory response. Drone hazing permits CDFW agents to scare off wolves with drones mounted with speakers and strobe lights. Range riding involves around-the-clock monitoring of herds of which suffer wolf presence via horseback or off-road vehicle usage. Wolves are not ignorant predators. They adapt quickly, and therefore, ignorant deterrents do not, have not, and will not affect them. And this leaves producers in an impossible position. Now, many of you may be wondering, why don't the producers, the victims of these wolves, fight back? And it's simply because they can't. Killing a wolf, even in the defense of livestock, can result in serious legal penalty, up to a year in jail and fines as high as $75,000. And that brings me to my interviews conducted during my field work. If you want the real story, the heartache, the ability to discover true empathic value with regards to this issue, that story must be told by those affected. The producers, the cowboys, and the families of which inhabit this valley, and that is exactly what I captured. Spending the majority of my week horseback, working yearlings and cows each morning, and conducting interviews in the evenings, I was fortunate enough to gather hours of heartfelt, vulnerable stories from cowboys, cow bosses, and landowners alike. Diving deep into not simply the effects wolves have had on their herds, but on their hearts and minds as well. I have compiled the most powerful moments from those interviews into a short film, of which I will present now. Now, following these testimonies, in conjunction with the experiential and analytical data of which I have gathered, it becomes clear that livestock producers are not calling for the eradication of wolves, but rather for the restoration of agency in defending their livelihoods, which brings us to a proposed solution: depredation permits, the legal authorization to lethally remove wolves that pose an immediate, recurring threat to cattle. These permits would not be indiscriminate, but targeted, data-driven responses to confirmed predation events, allowing producers to act before losses escalate further. This is the framework for wolf livestock conflict among other states, such as Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And therefore I, as well as my colleagues, see no true reason as to not put the same management strategy into place in the state of California. However, it remains vital to note that depredation permits would most aptly be classified as a surgical tool rather than a widespread solution. As unfortunate as it may sound, there is no solution of which I have encountered that accounts for the maintenance of gray wolf populations in California, as well as the protection of large-scale livestock production. In doing so, this approach would recognize a fundamental truth: coexistence cannot occur without consequence. If wolves are to remain on this landscape, in this valley, there must be a system in place that protects the people and the herds that depend on it. In summation, past the barbed wire fences and barn lights, among the beauty and the culture of the Sierra Valley lies a predator of which has cost families millions of dollars, a predator of which has resulted in sleepless nights and sorrow to operations of which have endured for generations. The story of this issue is not simply about the wolf. It is about those who feed us. It is about the stewards of the lands of that valley. It is about staring a calf in the eyes, a calf paralyzed from the waist down, with its insides dragging in the dirt, its mother feet away, and pulling a trigger. I lived that story more than once. I continue to live that story, and so do all of you. The Sierra Valley may feel distant to some of you, but the consequences of what happens there are shared. Because when rural communities are pushed to the edge, the effects do not stay rural for long. Beyond economics, those ranchers, those who are suffering these losses, are the ones quietly holding that landscape together. They care for the open space, whether it be through the protection of migration corridors, wildfire mitigation through rangeland management, or simply putting beef in the hands of families, grocers, and restaurants here in Truckee and across the nation. When they disappear, the land will not simply change, it will unravel. Open ground will become overgrown, unirrigated, and ultimately carved up and sold off, feeding into not only ecological duress, but the urbanization of your open spaces. Therefore, if there's one thing I can call upon you all to do, it is to be a storyteller, be a spokesperson, and urge the protection of livelihoods, not predators. Thank you.